Hey YouTube, welcome back to the Runaways YouTube channel, and we have some very topical information coming out from Mr. Brian Gottlieb at LSS. It's the banned and suspended announcement. It came out early. It was supposed to be released, I think, on Monday or Tuesday next week, but they're live now. These are changes that are effective after the ProQuest season, so it'll apply for at least the two callings and the whatever battle hardens are coming up around the world in the meantime. So, without further ado, let's go over the bans and LSS's reasoning for it, and then I will give my thoughts on what's going on. So, Classic Constructed, Belittle is banned. Winter's Wail is banned. Amulet of Ice is suspended until Icelander becomes Living Legend. Hypothermia is suspended until Icelander becomes Living Legend. And then so they say that these changes aren't necessarily because the actual format is severely imbalanced, but because that these three heroes, Icelander, Fi, and Oldhim, have kind of been on top of the metagame for multiple seasons now. And I think part of this is motivated by the fact that Dynasty didn't really impact the meta, I think, as much as maybe they had originally intended. So let's go over each of the arguments. So Winter's Wail, they say, Winter's Wail is too strong for a one-handed guardian weapon. Tales of Aria represents a set where boundaries were pushed, and as we learn more about Flesh and Blood, it has become increasingly clear that Duskblade was not the only majestic weapon that went too far. Winter's Wail has an impact on the game equivalent to, if not greater than, many two-handed weapons like Anothos, Romping Club, Nebula Blade, and Sledge of Anvilheim. It brings the same output while also carrying with it a rampart of the Ram's Head or a stalagmite or an arcane lantern. So I think originally when they designed these offhand equipments, they thought that there would be a significant penalty, but as we know, most of the time when you activate Winter's Wail and you attack for 4, you're already hitting like the efficiency point that like Anothos is really good at. And if you paid attention during like the Bravo video, like Anothos, just like pitching 2 cards to Anothos for 6 is not really good value. It's only like when you combine it with other effects that have Gogen that you really get any additional benefit from the 2-hand weapon. So you basically get the same rate as many of these cards, or even a better rate if you include the Frostbite. And I think as a player, I had kind of thought that Winter's Wail was like a little bit too strong, even during the time when Starvo was the best deck in the format. And I had thought that a lot of the power in Bravo Star of the Show was the fact that in addition to whatever attack that got +2 dominate Gogen, you are also swinging for 4 on your weapon with a relevant hit trigger. And with Bravo Star of the Show, it's basically every time that you hit your rainbow, you're getting that hit trigger because you had the ice card. So I think that this ban honestly makes a lot of sense. Originally, I thought that maybe they would hit Stalagmite as being a equipment that has a little bit too much value, but now this kind of accomplishes the same thing without needing to ban out a legendary, since the trade-off for not playing Winter's Wail and playing one-hand weapon is pretty steep. The only one-hand guardian weapon right now that is legal is Titan's Fist. And Titan's Fist has some anti-synergies if you want to also continue playing the rest of the ice package that you need if you want to have access to stuff like ice reacting or dominating glacial footsteps. Because most notably, except for Insidious Chill, all of the ice cards cost less than 3. So your Titan's Fist will only be attacking for 3 if you are attacking with it with no Frostbite. So it's a significant power decrease. And so overall, I think this does a lot to curb the power of the shields that Oldhim has access to. And so maybe we'll see Oldhim start playing Anothos and have a build that's more similar to Bravo. Or maybe they'll just continue to play this like one-hand ice heavy style. I'm not really sure. My personal thought is that Oldhim probably gets a lot worse because Uh, a lot of the games, even into some of Oldham's better matchups, like Fi, if you were teched out for it, the margins are still pretty close, and a big part of the power level in the matchup relied on attacking for the Winter's Whale hit trigger. And so I think that this should be a significant hit to Oldham's power. And honestly, I'd be pretty surprised if Oldham uh, was very strong. I think Oldham is still playable, but I would be very surprised if he was dominating the metagame like he is right now. Next up, Hypothermia and Amulet of Ice. These are Icelander targeted bans. So said that Icelander has not been quite as dominant as Oldham this season, but having good players that are playing Icelander is pretty scary, and I think that's true. I think Icelander is probably one of the more difficult decks to pick up and play just because the value system is a little bit less intuitive and is a little bit more punishing. If you arsenal a bad card with Icelander, you are not only costing yourself the one card, but you're also costing whatever, like another card that you need to play with it. So it's like a snowballing effect. So the difference between having a really strong Icelander pilot and somebody who's picking up Icelander for the first time is pretty big. And that being said, I think that Icelander was for sure one of the best decks to play in the meta, as we saw with the Leeds Battle Hardened results, as well as other ProQuest results around the world. So they targeted Hypothermia and Amulet of Ice, and they said that Hypothermia feels invulnerable against decks that rely on giving go again to their attacks. So I think this is mostly targeted at Dash or Briar, Fi to like a lesser extent, because there's more ways that Fi can play around Hypothermia. But definitely against Dash or Briar. So like if Dash leads off with like a zipper hit boost, if you play the Hypothermia on their 4-card hand, even if they have an empty arsenal slot, you're basically just for one card blanking 2 resources plus another card in their hand. And so like the single card value is just like very high, and there's almost like no difficulty, I guess, in deciding like when to play it. Like as soon as you see like that kind of a situation come up, you just play it. Against Dromai, if they like attack you with a dragon, they have like a bunch of dragons, like you play it, you're just like saving yourself a ton of life by doing so. And it's not like a particularly like interesting card. It's like the situations where it's good are pretty obvious. And so I think they just wanted Icelander's answers to have like a little bit more play into. So for example, now if you play a Channel Lake Frigid, or if you play something like Arctic Incarceration, giving them 2 Frostbites, these disruptive cards all still have power in that they, at face value, trade for some amount of resources, but there are ways that the other player can either play around it or requires like the Icelander to understand like the right timing to get a little bit more than the face value from the card. And so overall, I think these are pretty good changes. When they said that they wanted to ban Amulet of Ice, it says that it gives it Icelander like an ability to sculpt the flow of the game at like low deck building costs. So pretty much you play Amulet of Ice into like every single matchup. Originally, I thought that you wouldn't play Amulet of Ice into the aggro decks, but actually, Amulet of Ice ends up being pretty good in that matchup because you give up 1 card on 1 turn in exchange for 1 card on a future turn, but due to the nature of how aggro decks scale, ripping a card on a future turn sometimes has higher impact than just like the card, like the 1 card cost, as well as Amulet of Ice just being overall pretty good into decks that are trying to play a little bit more defensively against you. So for example, if there's Oldhams that want to block a lot of your damage, you can set up a situation with Amulet of Ice plus Insidious Chill in order to kind of rip their whole hand up. And maybe they just wanted to kind of lower the power level of that a little bit. You can still do it with Insidious Chills, like if you set up 3 Insidious Chills, but the actual cost of setting up 3 Insidious Chills is way higher than just putting up like 1 Insidious Chill or 2 Insidious Chills and like 2 or 3 Amulet Devices. Just for reference, like you can put up 2 Amulet Devices for every Insidious Chill that you set up. So like if you only really need like 1 turn worth of disruption or to kind of like shift the tempo, Amulet of Ice is technically a stronger card for that purpose. They banned Belittle, and they said that they took out a lot of strong anti-aggro tools from the format, and they didn't want to just have Fi kind of take over the format, or maybe like Belittle Briar. And they said that the ban is also directed at like the long-term health of Flesh and Blood. And so kind of to address the first point, I do think that if they made the bans in nerfing Oldhim, in addition to kind of just like letting Fi go unchecked, I think that for sure that Fi would definitely be like the best deck. And taking Belittle out is like a real nerf to some of Fi's like highest ceiling turns, mostly just on the basis of in order for Fi to get like max value out of Art of War, you really do need that Belittle starter, or maybe now you set it up with like a energy potion or like a tunic. It just requires more setup than before, and Belittle comes at like not a very high deck building cost for Fi because most of his kit is 3 or less power. And as far as the long-term health of the game, I do feel that because Belittle is so powerful that unless they print a similar card with different deck building restrictions that slot into aggro decks as Belittle, that every future set, whenever they come out with a hero, always has to keep they always have to keep Belittle in mind when designing the cards for the hero. And so it becomes a situation where you can't like make a hero's kit too many cards have 3 or less power. Otherwise, Belittle is just going to slot in and just like provide both consistency and power level to that deck. And so I think this ban kind of makes sense. It's just like a generic tool. I think in general, like generic tools in Flesh and Blood have to have a limit on their application because all decks have access to it. You they act as like like restricting tools for the design and development of the game. And so I think banning Belittle makes a lot of sense. You can honestly still push class specific cards to be just as powerful as Belittle given the right restrictions for deck building, obviously. But you just like when you do that, you don't have to consider whether or not it's going to break another deck down the line. And so I think overall this is a pretty positive change. I think the Belittle ban actually makes the Fi versus Icelander matchup a lot worse for Fi. Despite the fact that Icelander got nerfs, none of the Icelander nerfs, I think, severely impact her overall game plan against Fi. And whereas Belittle is a big component of the Fi game plan against Icelander to counteract cards such as Channel Lake Frigid. And so I think that Icelander finding ways to utilize Channel Lake Frigid is much stronger now because Belittle doesn't exist. And so there's kind of there's like forces working in both directions in all of the bans that they came up with. They said that they don't want to hit Crown of Seeds. Part of the reason is because they are hesitant to ban legendaries because of the I think the collectability aspect and like the investment aspect of the game. I don't mean investment like I'm going to stack up like a bunch of Crown of Seeds uh in my like back in the back of like my I don't know collection box so that eventually they're going to go to like hundreds or thousands of dollars. I mean investment as in like an individual player has to put aside a substantial amount of money in order to purchase any legendary. So obviously banning legendary is kind of uh, too liberally, I think, erodes player confidence in the value of their cards. And so I can understand the reasoning. I think that Crown of Seeds ultimately does add a lot to the consistency for decks like Oldhim, but hitting Winter's Whale kind of also hits his consistency because you don't have access to necessarily like 4 power all the time. And so I think that honestly, like the Winter's Whale hit probably already accomplishes the type of nerf that Oldhim needs, that a ban of Crown of Seeds would accomplish something similarly. In terms of like pure value, like unless you're using a tuna counter on it, Crown of Seeds isn't really plus. It's actually minus if you can't use the extra resource that you pitched the blue for. So you use like one on Crown of Seeds, one on Rampart, and you still have like one resource floating around. And unless you find a way to spend that resource, then like activating Crown of Seeds is actually making your overall game plan a little bit worse. But the main power for Crown of Seeds is that it gives Oldhim like ultimate arsenal flexibility. So usually when Oldhim attacks you with a big disruptive turn, the next turn when he gets like a free 4-card hand, it's unlikely that he can utilize all 4 cards. So being able to just arsenal like whatever last card was like a very strong tool for him to be able to then later on reclaim that card with Crown of Seeds on a future turn. And so I think that Crown of Seeds doesn't necessarily need a nerf given the weapon change. And so Briar can still LL, and no changes for Blitz. And then the next banned and suspended announcement is going to be after the release of Outsiders on March 20th. So I want to give my overall thoughts on what the metagame is probably going to look like. I think that probably out of all of the top 3 decks that they mentioned, Oldhim probably gets hit the hardest, just because Winter's Will is so integral to his game plan that the other heroes got hit with tools that they use, but not like a core aspect of their gameplay. And so I think I would expect Oldhim to kind of fall off the worst. So you have to look at decks that Oldhim did the best against and figure out what like really changes in the meta. So I think that with Oldhim being out of the format, there's certain heroes such as like Dorinthia, perhaps, or maybe let's think what else. It's like Dorinthia, I think, is like the main hero. Fight or like Katsu, like other ninjas to some extent, get a little bit better because that could be like one of their harder matchups. And I think that is probably counterbalanced. Like all these like aggro decks, especially like ones that rely on Belittle, are counterbalanced by the fact that like Belittle is taken out. So I think honestly, like the biggest benefactor are decks like mid-range decks that couldn't really like compete against Oldhim on like a pure value basis. So decks like Dorinthia, brute decks like Leviah and Rhinar actually might do a little bit better. Even though I think a lot of people considered maybe Oldhim to be like one of their better matchups. I think that from the results that I see, like usually Oldhim still ends up like winning out against those heroes. And I think like tanking both Belittle and then also Oldhim taking a hit kind of puts these like more mid-range oriented decks a little bit farther ahead, because Fi gets like a hit to his superpower turns, and Oldhim gets a hit to his value. I think that Icelander honestly should be relatively unchanged. Gets a little bit worse matchup into Briar and Dash, but I think that there are several replacement cards that could function, I think, well enough for those matchups in particular. I think that Dromai in particular, it really depends on whether or not people want to continue playing Fi. I think that Dromai still has quite a weak Fi matchup, and I don't think that Belittle was like a big part of the reason why the matchup wasn't so good for Dromai. And so if anything, like Fi needing to build like a little bit more mid-rangey serves to be a detriment for Dromai in that matchup, and particularly I think that Briar takes a significant step up because you're nerfing one of the highest damage potential aggro decks from their ceiling, and I think that was primarily the winning strategy against Briar, as well as taking a nerf to Icelander, one of Icelander's like best tools against Briar in hypothermia. And so I would honestly, like, in terms of my picks for meta winners, uh, for the week, from this announcement, I would probably pick Briar, Dorinthia, and Dromai. And so that's just my initial thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you like these changes? Do you not like these changes? And what you think that you would want to play the next calling. Once again, thanks everyone. Remember to like and subscribe if you want more competitive Flesh and Blood related content, and I'll see you guys on the next one.